Hi, I'm Anisha.
And I'm Becca. And together we're on a mission to give a voice to Thai and a platform to share its collective wisdom.
We're launching a new monthly podcast series, Thai Talks, to spotlight exceptional leaders and more important topics such as
impact investing and the transition to net zero, navigating the current macroeconomic and geopolitical climate,
governance and ethics decisions in light of the emerging technologies, and the virtuous cycle of entrepreneurship.
So subscribe to Thai Talks to hear more.
Today our guest is Joelle. She's a trained architect and she draws on more than 20 years of experience in stakeholder engagement, ecosystem development, and in sustainable built environment. She was the first Asia Pacific head for World Green Building Council, spearheading net zero carbon and healthier building in the region. Her time at the WGBC saw 25% more APAC Green Building Councils commit to net zero transformation in their countries. Before that, Joelle headed the Smart Sustainable Cities team at the Singapore Economic Development Board, driving public-private partnerships through innovation platforms such as Living Labs, NTU EcoCampus, and HDB Smart Hub. Joelle is most recently the head of Sustainability Asia at Lendlease, leading the organization to deliver its sustainable and social impact. She also holds a master's in architecture from the National University of Singapore and an MBA from the SMU. I got to know Joelle through a sustainability course that I recently did at the SMU, and I'm super excited to have her share her expertise and where the sustainability space is going in the real estate industry.
It's great when you've got that personal connection. I'm really interested in her background, both on the public sector side and the private sector.
Yeah.
In a space I don't know super well. So yeah, really excited for somebody.
Hi, Joelle. Thank you so much for making time to speak with me and Becca. Joelle, you're a trained architect and you draw on over 20 years of experience in stakeholder engagement, ecosystem development, and sustainable built environment. I got to know Joelle because I was doing this SMU course on sustainability, a 7-month course. And part of that course was also connecting with the community and key opinion leaders in this space. And I was very fascinated by everything that Joelle was talking about, be it on her LinkedIn or her sharing also at a panel discussion that we had. So Joelle, now let's talk about the industry that you have experience in, right? Now, the built environment sector contributes approximately to 40% of global carbon emissions that are threatening life as we know. But time is obviously running out for the world to be able to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. But still, the built environment sector has the potential to do so much more to really radically transform the way we build, materials that we use, like the walls surrounding us right now, and the ways buildings engage with the communities that we serve. Now, there's so many topics I want to talk about. Let me just get into these two questions. First, what does it mean really to be sustainable in the real estate today?
Yeah. So if you think about, exactly what you said, right? Building industry contributes to 40% of global emissions and 28% of operational carbon comes from the energy that buildings use. And 11 to 12% comes from embodied carbon. So what do I mean by embodied carbon? Essentially, it's the carbon that you produce from making materials, concrete, steel, glass, aluminum, things like that. These are highly pollutive industries and they use a lot of thenergy. We basically pull materials out from the ground. And it's just such an immense impact, right? If you think about the built environment, there's so many ways to cut it. If you think about operational energy, buildings are overcooled today.
True.
Right? If you just think about living in Singapore, how many times do you feel like, oh man, I need a cardigan?
Especially the cinemas, right?
I've got a long sleeve shirt on.
Exactly. In the cinemas and shopping malls and offices, most buildings are overcooled. We can easily find 20-30% efficiencies just by running the air conditioning better, maintaining it better, or delivering personalized cooling to where people are. We've probably seen situations like this, where you enter into a public building or office space and you realize, well, all these people, they're working from home. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And secondly, of course, in embodied carbon in the materials that we use, there's a lot of opportunity. If you think about concrete alone, concrete contributes to something like 40-50% of our embodied carbon in buildings alone.
Wow, gosh.
Cement is a little bit of substance in overall concrete mix. That's like the binder, is the glue for the concrete mix.
Yeah.
It is probably about 17-20% of the entire concrete mix, but it contributes to 90% of concrete's embodied carbon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even though we made a wall, we're already deep down in carbon.
Exactly. Already deep down in carbon,
Yeah.
right? So the industry is trying very, very hard to find cement replacements, net zero cement. The other big material that we're looking at is steel. I'm kind of in my green steel era for the last 12 months.
Wow.
Pursuing
Green steel.
yeah, green steel era.
Sounds like a sort of fashion pose.
Yeah.
Oh, that's blue steel. Yeah, that's the blue steel, green steel. Because steel, as well as the industry, contributes to about 8%. Construction industry buys about 50% of that steel, right? So we actually have a huge amount of impact, but often, people look towards the automobile industry, they look towards white goods, but they're not looking at construction, right?
True.
So there's a huge amount of work we need to do. We use reinforcement steel, the little bars that goes inside your concrete walls.
Mm-hmm.
We use concrete steel structures as well. So all that could be optimized, right? So there are lots of new technologies coming up as well in terms of green steel production, just changing the type of technology that we use to produce steel. So traditionally, we use BOF, blast oxygen furnace technology. There are new technologies like electric arc furnaces. And electric arc furnaces can be powered by renewables. It's already efficient, more efficient than BOF. And then with powered by solar or other renewables, it can really just create net zero steel.
I don't know about you, Becca, but my mind is like buzzing. My mind is buzzing. There's so much to catch up on. I didn't expect that real estate can become so sustainable. And green steel, I'm just going to hold on to that, right? Green steel, it's just incredible. So what's on the horizon for sustainability in this sector? Like, what are some of the upcoming trends and, what should we prepare for?
All the things that we're trying to do is actually just trying to do less bad. You drop a sustainability person in any traditional industry, all we're trying to do is resource efficiency, decarbonizing our operations, trying to, improve the circularity of our materials. And I'll go into each one of them, right? Like resource efficiency.
Yeah.
The basic tenets of sustainability is always around energy, water, waste, as well as the materials that you use. How do you build a building that uses less energy, less water, create less waste, right? Just from the build form, even in operation as well, we're always thinking about conservation, energy conservation, water conservation, and working with our tenants and our occupiers to reduce waste in their operations. So that's all around resource efficiency. If you think about materials, like I mentioned earlier, sourcing, the right kind of materials, lower carbon materials, but there's also fundamental rethink about, can we use less materials, right? As an architect, we were always taught about, start with first principles. What is free energy, free light, free water, work with nature, right? Rather than against nature. Can you do stuff that, you can harness, natural winds, lights, energy, from your site. So all these really tapped into passive design principles. Passive design basically means your building does the work passively. So you use site orientation. If you even think about some of our buildings in Singapore, I want to cite HDB, our Housing Development Board, that's our public housing authority here. All the buildings are kind of east-west orientation. Those two gable end walls are always blocked from the sun because the sun comes from the east and the west, right? And those two sides get super hot. So, windows are never on the east and the west.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
That's a great use case.
Yeah.
Passive design principle.
Passive design principle. So think about all that first before we actually jump into, say, active design, which is anything that uses energy, batteries, so I'm like, no gadgets in the house. We try not to have battery operated things, because they always break down, right? But that's often how we think about, using free stuff and not tapping into energy centric or energy heavy equipment first. So that's really how we think about sustainability, doing less, but we talked about where the opportunities, what's next on the horizon. I think what's next is really doing more good. How do you actually do more good? Principles like circularity, that's one thing. How do we think about end of life and not downcycling our materials, but upcycling them? So I think most of the time when you think about recycling, it's always downcycling. It goes into a lower value product, not upcycling a higher value product. Or, designing for disassembly, like our buildings, once it's torn down, it goes into debris.
Yeah.
You get like wrangly steel.
Yes.
Right. It's really, really hard to untangle the plastics from it,
The concrete.
from it. And anything that's or glass or aluminum is really difficult to disassemble our current state of buildings. So, the next phase is really how do we think about designing for disassembly so that the parts get a second life, right? So that's with circular economy principles in mind. And doing more good would look like designing with nature as a stakeholder, right? I think we often think of nature and the environment as a resource we can draw stuff out from.
Yeah.
But it is an environment that we are embedded in. It is actually a key stakeholder. We've got a lot of flora and fauna that have no voice, right?
True.
Essentially, we have to be stewards on behalf of some of, the other living species. I know it sounds very woo-woo, but, but I think it's really important to have nature as a stakeholder in, when we're designing for new buildings.
This all sounds amazing. It's terms I've never really come across before with designing with nature as a stakeholder. Do you have examples you can share?
So one of the examples I came across recently, it was a construction project in London where the contractors actually took apart the old structural steel. They took away put it through some modern testing, and then they brought it back to site again, using it for the new building as structural steel.
Wow.
I've also come across, say for instance, systems furniture. So that's at a much smaller scale, in an office environment, systems furniture, where you can take apart the different components and then it gets refitted into new furniture. So there is a international furniture brand in town that does it. If you want the link, I can definitely hit you up.
All right. I like that.
In terms of designing with nature in mind, maybe a smaller example would be the Green School in Bali, right? So I visited the Green School maybe about 10, 15 years ago now. It's founded by a gentleman called John Hardy. Essentially, it basically tries to inculcate, the students that it brings to the school, a different way of education, like, really working with nature. No artificial lighting in that school.
Wow.
Everything's run by, whether it's solar or wind turbines. And also they have like toilets that are using compost toilets. The entire structure of this green school is fantastic. It's beautiful. It's made from bamboo.
Wow.
Yeah. John Hardy, it's all about nature connectivity for a different form of education. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Incredible. Okay. Joelle, so what are some specific strategies to ensure that sustainability is embedded into every stage of its real estate project, straight from design to construction and even beyond it?
Yeah. That's a really great question because I often find that most of the time sustainability is an afterthought. We'll bring them in after the design's been fixed. And there will be, and in the industry, we procure consultants as well. And often it's the core traits that are already fixed, like core design, archi, civil and structure, your mechanical and electrical already fixed before you get your sustainability consultants in. Obviously, the best way to do it is bring them up front in the design process. But I think any company really serious about sustainability. And I saw a stat today, which worries me on Business Times today. More than 50%, I think, of CEOs in Singapore are deprioritizing sustainability.
Oh,
yeah.
More than 50%.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Number.
I think it's a mix of, there are other broad agendas, there are different types of priorities. And of course, the economy is not doing great. But this is the best time to prioritize sustainability, right? It's a new way of doing business.
Yes.
How do we create value in a more sustainable way? And sustainability, in some ways, if we think about resource efficiency, reducing material, reducing energy, reducing water, all this saves you money. We are just asking people to think of it differently, asking to change their mindsets, and all these are very, very uncomfortable and potentially, a lot of resistance there as well. So, a bit of a tangential thought there, but any company that's really serious about sustainability should think about setting the right type of targets, and what is really their their mission as an organization, right? How do they want to serve the world? How do they want to add value to their customers? I think that's a really important thing. So for me, as a sustainability professional in the real estate sector, what I believe is really embedding sustainability across all the processes and the systems that we deploy in the investment life cycle, right? So at the start, whenever we are thinking about developing a new building or acquiring a new building, what are some of the things that we need to consider? Whether it's commercial assessment of, carbon pricing, how do we put it into that assessment?
Yeah.
Right. Does this building have a pathway to net zero? How do we know that? Are the systems primed for upgrade? Is there optimization opportunities? Are there opportunities for improvement from the envelope or facade of the building? So there are different things that we consider during a due diligence stage whenever we think about investment. That's one. And the second stage, will be in design and development, right? Where, architects will start pulling out their pencils, drawing stuff on AutoCAD and, now it's Revit and BIM and whatnot. What kind of sustainability targets and metrics do we want to infuse? Like I mentioned earlier, it's first principles first, right? We think about sustainability sometimes from an incremental improvement perspective. Like, what did we do last time? Can we improve it a little bit this time? Yeah. Which is not a bad way of thinking. But whenever there's an opportunity, I much prefer start with a blank slate, tabula rasa, as the architects like to call it, and think about what is a BHAG, right? A big, hairy, audacious goal. If you put in all your effort, all your wits and the smarts about you and your supply chain and your partners, what kind of, amazing development can you create? People need vision. We need to be able to articulate and tell people, like, what is that grand vision of sustainability, including nature as a stakeholder? What does that look like for the built environment in order to bring people along the journey? Yeah.
Can I jump on a small tangent?
Yes. Yeah, go for it.
I can't get out of my head the personalized cooling example that you gave earlier. And I think when you talk about this full life cycle, air conditioning feels like the last thing you think about because it gets plonked into the units like just before the building is. So if we took air conditioning as part of this journey, like at what point would considering the air conditioning come into that building design?
Yeah. So, interestingly, or maybe not so interestingly, we actually consider it upfront, considering that, air conditioning in this country, in any typical building takes about 60% of our total energy consumption. So it is a very big and important driver for decarbonization. Actually, if you do it right, happy days. If not, yeah. So we actually consider it upfront because you've got to think about where are your naturally ventilated zones? Where are your air conditioned zones? As much as possible, we try to have naturally ventilated zones as much as possible because that's free. Yeah. Free cooling, free ventilation. Remember what I mentioned about use things that are free, right? So tap into wind flows, etc. So, sometimes you see obviously things like hotel lobbies or school corridors or even some like office, toilet areas. Those are the areas that are prime for that opportunity for natural ventilation, right? So always think about tapping on free ventilation first, and the second is which are the zones that you absolutely must cool. And personalized cooling. One way to think about it is a project that I worked on. We used a series of strategies. And of course, the engineers did all these. They basically zoned the entire floor plate. So they classified the floor plate based on micro zones. Okay. Right. So this zone is individually controlled. And what happens is when people tap in through the door, they'll be directed to a certain zone. Right. And then you cool that zone. Right. Wow. Rather than cooling the entire floor plate. Yeah.
Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's already in the works.
It is possible. Yeah.
And can it save money?
Yes, absolutely. Imagine, just cooling where people are, rather than cooling the entire space.
Yeah, so many times it happens, right? Where people are, it can get slightly warm as well. And then you go somewhere and it's just freezing because there's nobody there. It's also about diverting traffic. You also move people where you eventually want spaces to be cool. I think it's great for like hot desking.
Exactly. And there are, of course, different ways of cooling as well. So it's not just relying on the air conditioning system. You know, I always default to my good old fan. And now it's got a fancy name called hybrid cooling, essentially putting a ceiling fan and air conditioning. But that's what we do at home, right? If the weather gets too hot, you turn on the air conditioning first and then you turn it off and turn on the fan. That's what we should do. I mean, I think now most offices are going paperless, so you won't have to worry of turning on the fan and papers flying out. So that was a legitimate concern.
Yeah, one of our guests asked earlier, right, whether we still have a printer at home. So I realized I'm the only one who still has it. I haven't used it, but I have it.
Don't have one.
So, Joelle, so what's on the horizon for sustainability in this sector, right?
Yeah.
So let's touch a little bit about that. How can we start creating positive legacies from the buildings that we are creating today? Could you please share maybe some examples?
Yeah. I would say that, you know, buildings have a social agenda almost, like, you know, I think there's so much that buildings can give back to the public realm, can give back to their community. So first order, what can buildings give back to the public realm? A couple of examples that I've come across, you know, in Singapore, we've got lots of gated development where, you know, the swimming pool, the playground, all these lovely facilities are exclusive to the private residents. And of course, that is rightly so in a way from an economical perspective. But there are actually opportunities to give back, right? Could there be gardens that be planted outside, or could there be, you know, the playground facility could be shared? So there are actually opportunities like that. So at PLQ where I used to work, there is a condo building, and the playground was deliberately placed on the ground floor.
Right? So it's not gated.
It's not gated. The swimming pool is private, but the playground is public. So it, you know, activates the space. You know, kids come round and, you know, play, and it's such a lively environment. I think there's so much developers could do to activate the ground plane a lot more. And, you know, this is what we call in the industry placemaking. And placemaking is really not just providing a space, right, with no character, no memory, no delight. You know, it's all these things that make us want to go to a place.
True. So on that topic, I know GEM is another building which is rather highly considered in the space. Would you have a view on that?
Yeah, so GEM is a great building. It's got a playground at the rooftop, you know, invites families to use some of these spaces. Recently, an accessibility guide was also developed with a nonprofit, the Disabled People Association. So usually, you know, for buildings, they'll go through a series of checks and tests with the Building Construction Authority for universal design to ensure that people with disabilities are able to access that building from public transportation to the building. But it's often done from a person with no disability, right? You know, the designers who are doing it often are not able to kind of empathize. So what I know that the GEM folks did was work with the Disabled People Association and created accessibility guide for within the interiors of the building. So how they move around, and even like providing suggestions like where the signage should be, you know, how tall should the concierge tables and counters in order to meet the needs and you know, kind of interact with people with disability.
So those were great examples for Singapore, Joelle. Now, there's another building called the Exchange in Malaysia. Would you have a view on that?
Yeah, so the Exchange, TRX, is new retail development right in the center of the city. There's a great example there. There's a 10-acre park that's actually built on top of the shopping mall. You know, we were talking about nature and biodiversity, right? Yeah. So KL, as you know, not a lot of trees in KL, right? So that's actually a really good example of how do you use the public realm, you know, spaces on your rooftop to give back to the community and also give back to nature. So what I heard is there's more than 150 different types of native species that are being planted there. So it'll be a really exciting place to visit.
All right, Joelle, could you discuss the role of community engagement and collaboration in sustainable real estate projects? Because clearly those are some of the themes that are coming out, right? Be it working with the Disability Association, coming up with that open space at PLQ. So clearly communities have to be engaged. So could you discuss that?
Going back to this whole notion of, buildings having a social agenda, I think it's really important for real estate players, developers, designers to engage with the people that they serve earlier on in the process. Lots of examples, right? So during design, during development, how do we consult with the people surrounding the project in order to figure out okay, what's the immediate impact there? And of course, the people that they're supposed to serve, right? Engaging with their client, obviously that's a no-brainer. And during construction, a lot of negative impact, noise, dust.
True.
And how do you elevate that, right? Building community relations even before construction work start. But I think the real biggie is during operations. There's so many opportunities from inclusive spend. How do you actually buy goods and services in an operating building, whether it's office or a shopping mall, even the things that simple things like coffee beans in your office pantry. Could be part of inclusive spend, or cleaning services, could be part of it if you're hiring from, say, a small and medium enterprise, or say catering, working with vulnerable groups who have set up, say, cafes and things like that. So those are opportunities for inclusive spend. There are other opportunities like, space provision. Right? If you've got a huge open space or underutilized units, could they be offered to social enterprises, not for profit, for either their own office space or for larger events like road shows to help people understand or drive awareness for the social sectors, for instance.
That's a really good point. Having the space, no one's using it right now, at least do some good with the space.
Yeah, exactly.
Get more players in the real estate industry to collaborate then in that way, because you need them, always buildings, to be talking to each other to understand utilization rates, where there might be some opportunities to collaborate more. What would be your message to the real estate industry for today?
I think there really needs to be a concerted effort to consider this, right? A lot of folks think of it as ad hoc opportunities, or when opportunity arises. That's not a bad thing too, we take whatever opportunities we get, but you do need to place it front and center, right? Say for instance, if, you're a marketer, there's when there's a marketing event, and there are constantly marketing events. I really love partnering with marketing and comms folks because they've got so many ideas. And I think that's really the best place to start, working with marketing and comms teams within real estate development, and working with them on how do they factor in circular economy principles in their event setups. How do they engage the community when they are planning for an event? Is there a partner who can support them in one bit of it, right? Say for instance, there will be a job fair, you're working on a big employment kind of event. Is there social enterprises that you can work with who hire or support people with disability, high functioning autism, things like that, where often there are a lot of obstacles to gaining employment. Yeah.
It's a good question. So looking ahead, what are some of the upcoming trends in sustainability that you are excited about?
Personally, I'm always for doing more good rather than doing less bad. And nature as a stakeholder, there is a term called regeneration or regenerative design, which I really believe is the next thing. I know folks in permaculture, in kind of that sector has already been doing so much work. I don't want to bastardize the term and steal it from them, but there is definitely a lot to be explored in regenerative design. So things like, again, similar principles, circular economy principles, touching lightly on earth. How do we design with nature using natural materials? So there's a huge opportunity here with, say, bio-based materials instead of pulling stuff out from the ground, right? Bio-based materials would be things like timber, using cross-laminated timber in buildings rather than using concrete and steel. In Singapore, we still don't have many buildings that use cross-laminated timber. At last count, I think we have less than 15 buildings in the whole of Singapore. But it definitely needs to, I think, be accelerated as a building material. And there are, of course, lots of others, right? Using mycelium as a potential material as well for,
interesting.
There are lots of applications there for insulation, as wall covering. Plenty. So bio-based materials, that's kind of the next big thing for me.
So we're definitely watching that space, right, Becca?
100%.
100%, yes. So recently I completed a course at SMU to learn more about sustainability space. Now, one of the main things that my peers were discussing is how do you make a switch into this industry? And the fact of the matter is, every time as a mid-career person, you make a switch, the pay is never going to match up to whatever you're earning based on your past 20 years of experience, right? So how do we continue to earn decent amount of money while moving into the sustainability space and upskilling ourselves?
Yeah. Don't look for a green job. Green the job you have. And every part of our, I guess, economy could be sustainable, but we just need to find those opportunities. And what better, you're definitely much better placed, in your industry than I am to effect change, right? You've got the networks, you know how your industry works, and it's taking a slightly different lens, right? How can we do this better? Who are the suppliers that we use? What are the materials that we use? How does this generate waste? How does this generate impact? I think if everyone start asking these same questions of themselves and of their roles and of their companies and of their supply chains, I think that's where real change can be effected.
So don't look for a green job, green your job. That's an important thing. So I think to wrap it up, the way I look at it, the sentence that's kind of stuck in my head is do more good, do less bad.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much sums up. So thanks a lot, Joelle, for spending time with us and buzzing our brains with so much that's happening in the real estate construction space. I couldn't even have imagined there's so much happening, and how you're also bringing communities together.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of crucial as we get into more of regenerative design.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Joelle. It was lovely always speaking with you. I learned so much. I believe you did too, right, Rebecca?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Get in touch with us at Thai Talk if you've got any suggestions, recommendations, or feedback for us.
Subscribe to hear more from Thai Talks on entrepreneurship, investment, and impact. I'm Manisha.
And I'm Becca.
Thank you for listening.